Hello guys, welcome to my channel. So in this video we are going to discuss about the microservice communications. So what are microservice communications? Like that is we are discussing about the inter-service communications, how two microservices communicate with each other, and in that we will be discussing about the synchronous communication and its characteristics, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of synchronous communication. And another form of communication is asynchronous communication. What are the advantages, disadvantages of asynchronous communication? So first we will see one flow how the microservice communication will happen. So what happens is there is these four modules or the four microservices, we can say. We have the user service, we have the order service, we have the product service, and the payment service. And there is a user who orders a product. Okay, so whenever the user sends a request, the request will be received by the user service. That user service, what it will do, it will send the request to the order service. So once order service receives that request, it will send a request to the product service to check the inventory whether the product is available or not. Then a product service will check the inventory and it will send a response to the order service. This product service will send a response back to the order service. Then order service will send a request to the payment service for payment related activities. Once payment is done, so we will be sending a response to the user saying that order is successfully placed. So this is how the microservice communication works. So basically what is microservice communication means? Microservice communication is how independent services interact with each other in order to complete a business workflow. Here placing a order is a business workflow. So all these services are interacting each other and in order to place the order. So this is what microservices communication. Now let's look at the two types of microservice communications, that is synchronous communication and asynchronous communication. First we will look at synchronous communication. What is synchronous communication? Synchronous communication is the one where one service calls another service and waits for the response. And here you remember this diagram, this flow chart, and you just follow the things. So what happens is user places the order, then order service calls the product service to check the inventory and everything. Then inventory, that is the product service checks the stocks is available or not, then it will send a response to the order service. Then order service calls the payment service. Once the payment is completed and then the payment service responds, the response will be sent back to the user. So you can see here that all these activities, that is the user send a request to user service, then order service, order send a request to product service, product service send a back to order service the response, and then order service calling the payment service. These activities are happening in a sequence. In synchronous communication, all these activities happens in a sequence. So now let's see what are the features of synchronous communication. The features of synchronous communications is blocking. Why it is blocking? For example, when order service sends a request to the product service, the order service has to wait until the product service sends a response to the order service. So that means the order service is blocked from doing the activities. So that's why we call it as blocked. And it's a request response model. It's just an API call. We are sending the request and we are trying to get the response from the other services. And another thing is sequential flow. As I explained you, this is a sequential flow, like the flow happens in a sequence, that is one after the another. Now let's see what are the advantages of this synchronous communication. This synchronous communication is simple and easy to understand, and as you all know, this is very easy to understand. And immediate response, like the whenever user files a request, it go to the user service calls the order service calls the product service, and everything happen in a sequence. That's why the response is immediate. And easier debugging, like for example, if the order service calls the product service, and if the product service is down or it is not responding properly, then we can easily debug, because it's a synchronous communication, everything happens in the sequence. Next is the stronger consistency. Yeah, because of this one sequential things happening one by one, so we can say it's a stronger consistency. So now let's see the disadvantages of synchronous communication. The disadvantages of synchronous communication is tight coupling. So since the modules are waiting for one another's response, it's tightly coupled. For example, if the product service is down for some time, then the order service is also fails and the user will not be able to place the order. So that's the single point of failure, we can say. But in microservices, you cannot have the single point of failure. So now let's see the another disadvantage, that is high latency. For example, if the product service is slow or product service is not able to respond on quickly, then the order service has to wait. That means there is a high latency between the microservices. And one more disadvantage is cascading failures. For example, if since everything happens in the sequence, if product service fails, if the product service is down for some reason, then order service cannot place the order and it cannot call the payment service. That is what we call it as cascading failures. Now let's see what are the examples of synchronous communication. For synchronous communication, we can use RestTemplate, that is a legacy one, and in modern applications we will be using WebClient, and another one is OpenFeign client we will be using. So it is the recommended for microservice synchronous communication. So now let's see what is asynchronous communication. So you remember this flow chart. So here what happens is user places an order, so the request will be coming to the user service, and user service, instead of calling the order service directly, so what it will do means it will produce an event and put it in this queue. Okay, so there is this queue and the user service will create an event and it will produce put it in the queue. So order service, what it will do, it will consume this event from the queue and it will process the order, and again it will put that event in the queue. So these other and this event, what order service is putting into the queue, this event is broadcasted to all the other services. Now this product service, payment service and notification service, they can consume the event from the queue and they can process the request. So this is known as asynchronous communication. Asynchronous means here the like it is not direct communication, it's not happening in a sequence. We are just creating the event and we are publishing it in the queue, and every service is consuming that event. So that is what we call it as asynchronous communication. So what is the characteristic of asynchronous communication is it's an event driven communication, because we are producing the event and we are putting it in the queue, and some other services are consuming the event. That is what we call it as event driven communication. And it's a non-blocking, because user does not wait for the response. Like whenever order service wants to check the product service, it need not, it will just process the order and put the event in the queue. Order service will, if there is any queue available, it will consume that event and it will start processing. So there is no blocking, and one service will not wait for the other service. And loose coupling between the services. Loose coupling between the services means, for example, if product service is down or if it's not working, then the system will won't fail. This payment service, notification service, order service will be working as normal. Only the product service is not working. Like once the product service comes back, so it will consume that event from the queue and it can process accordingly. Another one is parallel execution of services. Yeah, once the event is produced, they can consume the event parallelly and they can process it. Then eventual consistency. What is eventual consistency means? So it's not immediate, like every services will process the request, and after some time, so everything will be in sync. It's not immediate sync, it will be eventual sync. then independent processing by each service. So every service will process the request independently. Now let's see what are the advantages of asynchronous communication. So the advantages of asynchronous communication is high scalability. What is high scalability? Services can process events independently. For example, if there are many events that are placed in the queue, then order service can increase the number of instances and it can process the events easily without any delay. So that is how that scaling is the scaling ability is there for a individual microservices. That is what we call it as scaling. And loose coupling, like services don't depend directly on each other. And better fault tolerance, the I mentioned, right? If one service goes down, then the system won't be in failure, so other services will be working as expected. And faster user response, yeah, since it's a asynchronous communication, the user will be getting a faster response and he no need to wait for all the communication to happen and complete. And supports event driven architecture, yeah, it supports the event driven architecture and enables parallel processing. Yeah, because the like event will be published in the queue, and all the services can consume this event and they can process parallelly. So these are all the advantages of asynchronous communication. Let's see what are the disadvantages of asynchronous communication. The disadvantages of asynchronous communication is it's harder to debug and trace flow. For example, if an request fails in any one of the step, then it's very hard to debug since it's asynchronous communication. And also another thing is eventual consistency. As I mentioned that everything is not actually happening in a sequence, it's happening eventually, like asynchronously. So that means the consistency is not immediate, but at after some time it will be in sync. And more complex architecture, like because it requires messaging systems like RabbitMQ or Kafka, it's a more complex architecture. And handling duplicate events and ordering issues, yeah, if there are any duplicate events that is produced into the queue, then you may have problems with the ordering. So you should also take care of multiple things when working with asynchronous communication. And increased operational overhead, because you need to manage the queues, the brokers and the monitoring. So you need to have a knowledge of so many things in order to work on this microservices communication, especially the asynchronous communication. So let's see what are the examples that are currently in the market for asynchronous communication. So we can use the like RabbitMQ and Kafka. So these are all the brokers that we will be using in for the asynchronous communication. Let's like we have asynchronous communication and asynchronous communication. Which one to use? Okay, it mainly depends on your requirement. Okay, which one to use? For example, in this let's see this architecture. In this architecture, for example, the user is sending a request to the user service, and other order the user service sending a request to the order service. The if order service has to check the inventory before processing the order, like before placing the order, it has to check whether the stock is available or not. Then order service has to call the product service, then it has to wait until the product service responds back. Once the inventory or the product is available, then it has to call the payment service. So now the communication between order service and product service should be synchronous communication. Okay, in this case it cannot be asynchronous, but other services it can be asynchronous. So based on the requirement, you have to choose which communication you should be using. Okay, so I think I have explained you about the different ways of microservices communication, the asynchronous communication and the asynchronous communication. If you have any doubts, please write it in the comment section, and please like, comment and subscribe to my channel if you find this video helpful. Thank you guys, thank you so much for watching.